Hi, everyone. My name is George Butler. I'm part of the doctoral program cohort, and today I want to walk you through week six discussion prompt, which requires us to reflect on the week's reading. In this case, it's intergroup conflict and cooperation. I want to bring your attention to this fine looking gentleman on the screen. His name is Samuel Doe. In the early 80s, I think it was 1980 exactly, Mr. Doe was a master sergeant in the Army. He participated in a coup d'etat and overthrew the Liberian government at the time, which was a democratically elected government headed by a gentleman named Tolbert. It was a bloody coup, and Mr. Doe and his cohorts executed President Tolbert and 13 of his aides. And from their point, one may argue that Liberia began uh, a rapid spiral down into chaos. So after the initial coup, Liberia had a period of civil war, and that lasted for a few years, and then it subsided, and then another civil war ensued. This time, it was precipitated by a gentleman named Charles Taylor. Charles Taylor uh, used to be part of the dictator Samuel Doe's government, and then they had a fallout. And I believe Doe wanted to eliminate him, kill him, and he was able to escape and fled to the United States. And before he went to the United States, he exiled to Nigeria, but eventually came to the United States. And this is the fine gentleman here. Don't let that look fool you. He's equally as vicious as Samuel Doe. So the stage was set for Liberia's Second Civil War, where Charles Taylor and his cohorts came into Liberia from nearby Guinea, a neighboring country, invaded Liberia, and proceeded to march on to the capital city of Monrovia with the attempt to dethrone Mr. Doe. The next few slides will give you a sense of the carnage that ensued in this conflict. It was bloody, and it lasted nearly, when you count the first Civil War, it lasted for nearly a decade. Millions were killed, displaced, and injured. I give you some warning that these images are going to be a bit disturbing, but I think it's necessary to convey the point of this presentation. I'm not going to move my screen because that's a pretty bloody image, and I think you get the point. So let's get down to the meat of this presentation. I start off with the question, what is intergroup conflict? Well, based on the literature we read this week, we find that intergroup conflict generally involves conflicts of interest within a competing group. That social networks and shared past and future can influence the decisions of individuals in competitive intergroup relationships. And that intergroup conflict is seen across a range of group living species. And I added the various streams of literature um, that I synthesized that thought from. Give you a couple of minutes to digest what I just put on the screen. Okay, we can continue. So, uh, even when economic and political factors are involved, identity competition drives intergroup conflict. This is something that was postulated by Mr. Sewell. Again, let me repeat that. I think it's very important we understand because that's the crutch of this presentation. Even when economic and political factors are involved, identity competition drives intergroup conflict. That theory was in fact supported by Stewart, who shares the view of Sewell and argues that religious conflicts need not be about religion or religious conversation and usually have non-religious causes. Couldn't agree more, quite frankly. And I'll tell you why, and that's why I am using the Liberian conflict as a case study for this theory. Sewell and Stewart's theory was validated in Liberia's Civil War. You see, Liberia's faction fought under this guise of social injustice and as liberators. Sounds familiar? Seems like every warlord seems to espouse those sentiments. However, the actors in Liberia's civil war consisted mostly of the Gill and Mano peoples from Nimba County in eastern Liberia. Now, a little backdrop on Liberia. Liberia, although it's a country that is divided by counties and borders and boundaries. Remember, Africa inherently are governed by tribal relationships. Many of these tribes were in existence hundreds, if not thousands of years before the Western nations came and divided out these lands. And this hatred, these social identities, they go way back, thousands of years. And in this case, it's what we have here, the Gill Mano tribe. Now, what happened was the Gill and Mano people had long been opposed and prosecuted by Liberian President Samuel Doe, the first the gentleman who committed the coup d'etat, and his Kron ethnic group. The Kron was his people, and they had been in conflict with the Gill and Mano tribes from Nimba County. Again, this sets the stage. So let's just kind of replay this. We have a coup, and it's under the justification that he is there to liberate the Liberian people and make life better for them. And what happens within a few years is a civil war that becomes an ethnic cleansing, genocide conflict between warring tribes. And this is going to bring us to this religious theory posed by Sewell. So a theorist named Muhammad al-Qadid contended that while empirical studies on religion and conflict are limited, the prevailing social sciences suggest that identity may be a mechanism that is used by political institutions in order to legitimize their agenda. Sounds familiar? Yes, just what I just discussed in the previous slide. The justification is one thing, but at the end of the day, it may be based on some religious activity. Theorist Benjamin J. Darr also wrote that Jeffrey Sewell has convincingly argued that religion provides a profound source of group identity because the content of religious identity addresses basic psychological needs better than non-religious group identities. It's pretty self-explanatory, but let me just glaze over that a little bit more. In other words, Mr. Darr is suggesting that people can be motivated a lot more if you add religion to the mix than they would for non-religious reasons. And we see that every day in the Middle East and generally all over the world. In this case, I want to just add that to many who are not familiar, tribal identity is as intense as religious identity. They're exactly the same intensity, and so they can be used interchangeably in this regard. Part of this part of this week's reading that I also found to be compelling and ties into this conversation has to do with who are the participants of these conflicts. So in this reading this week, we talked about social influence, accessibility, and group entitlement as being important factors in participation in intergroup violence. We read McDome's articles that found that participants in Rwanda's genocide were more likely to live in the same neighborhood or household as other participants. That author also found that participants in Rwanda's genocide were more likely than non participants to live both in the same household and within close proximity of other perpetrators. What I want to say to that theory is exactly what was going on in Liberia. They began to use children as child soldiers to uh, to um, to further their objectives. So I'm just going to leave you guys with a final thought here, and then we'll wrap this up. I apologize. This is really a deep conversation can that really can extend far beyond 3 minutes. But due to the scope of this presentation, we'll end it here. But I want to leave you with a few thoughts. So, intergroup conflict is modeled as a game of strategy in which individuals within groups cooperate to compete with other groups. Together, the literature suggests that intergroup conflict is a game of strategy in which individuals within groups cooperate to compete with other groups for scarce resources, such as territory, food, mating opportunities, power, and influence. Move my screen out of the way so I can see the end of this here. Oh, let's try to get through here. However, it is worth noting that none of these papers that we read this week explicitly addresses the question, what is intergroup conflict? Isn't that strange? I find that to be quite interesting because as I did the research, that particular question, which I started with at the beginning of this presentation, was never quite answered. So I apologize for the rest of this, the thought. I'm not sure how to move my camera over. I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm just going to get off the screen for here. Just bear with me. Nope, can't do it. All right. Well, we'll leave it here. And I will end the presentation at this point. Thank you very much for your engagement, and I look forward to reading all of your wonderful presentations. Thank you.